Homeless man saves woman from attack, then vanishes before anyone could thank him. Asterisk, the neon lights of downtown Portland cast eerie shadows across the empty streets as Sarah Chen hurried toward her car in the parking garage beneath her office building. It was nearly midnight on a Thursday, and the 29-year-old software engineer had once again lost track of time while debugging code for her startup's latest project. The garage was dimly lit and eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of her heels against concrete breaking the silence. Sarah had always prided herself on being independent and fearless. Growing up as a daughter of immigrants who had built a successful restaurant business from nothing, she had learned early that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. After graduating from MIT with a computer science degree, she had moved to Portland to launch her own tech company, working 18-hour days to turn her vision of accessible, educational software into reality. But as she walked through the nearly empty garage, Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Something felt wrong. The usual security guard wasn't at his post, and several of the overhead lights were flickering ominously. Her car seemed impossibly far away, parked in a corner spot that had seemed convenient 12 hours earlier, but now felt isolated and vulnerable. When she heard the footsteps behind her, at first, Sarah tried to convince herself it was just another late worker heading to their car. But the footsteps were deliberately quiet, almost stealthy. When she quickened her pace, they quickened too. When she slowed down to listen, they stopped entirely. Her heart began to race as she realized she was being followed. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached into her purse for her keys. Her fingers, fumbling through the contents while she tried to maintain a steady pace, she could hear the footsteps getting closer now, no longer trying to be subtle. Behind her, a man's voice called out, rough and menacing, "Hey lady, stop right there." Sarah broke into a run, her heels clicking frantically against the concrete as she sprinted toward her car. Behind her she could hear heavy footsteps pounding after her, gaining ground with each second. Her breath came in short gasps as panic flooded her system, and she realized with growing terror that she wasn't going to make it to her car in time. Just as she felt a hand grab her shoulder, spinning her around, Sarah saw her attacker clearly for the first time. He was a large man in his 30s, with wild eyes and the desperate look of someone who had nothing left to lose. His grip on her arm was painful, and she could smell alcohol on his breath as he leaned close to her face. "Give me your purse, and your keys," he snarled, "and maybe I won't hurt you." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The garage was empty, her phone was buried somewhere in her purse, and this man was twice her size. She opened her mouth to scream, hoping someone, anyone, might hear her. But before she could make a sound, a voice rang out from the shadows near the garage entrance. "Let her go." Both Sarah and her attacker turned toward the voice, and Sarah saw a figure emerging from behind a concrete pillar. It was a man, tall but thin, wearing layers of worn clothing and a knitted cap pulled low over his face. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see that he was homeless. His clothes were dirty and patched, his beard unkempt, and he carried a worn backpack that contained what appeared to be all his worldly possessions. The attacker laughed harshly. "Walk away, old man. This isn't your business." "I'm making it my business," the homeless man replied calmly, stepping closer. "The lady doesn't want to be here with you. Let her go, and we can all walk away from this." Asterisk, the attacker's grip on Sarah's arm tightened, and she winced in pain as his fingers dug into her flesh. "I said walk away," he shouted at the homeless man, his voice echoing through the empty garage. "This has nothing to do with you." But the homeless man continued to approach, his movements calm and deliberate despite the obvious danger. As he drew closer, Sarah could see his face more clearly in the flickering fluorescent light. He appeared to be in his 50s, with kind eyes that seemed strangely familiar, though she was certain she had never seen him before. There was something about his bearing, his quiet confidence, that suggested he had once been someone very different from the man who now lived on the streets. "Son," the homeless man said gently, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to come from years of experience dealing with desperate people. "I can see you're hurting. I can see you're scared. But this isn't the way to solve your problems. This young lady hasn't done anything to you, and hurting her isn't going to make your life any better." The attacker's eyes darted nervously between Sarah and the homeless man, and Sarah could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. "You don't know anything about my life," he snarled, but his voice had lost some of its earlier aggression. "Maybe not," the homeless man replied, taking another step closer. "But I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to feel like the whole world has turned against you, like you have no choices left. I've been where you are, son, but this isn't the answer." Sarah watched in amazement as the homeless man continued to talk, his voice never rising, never becoming threatening, but somehow managing to diffuse the situation through sheer force of compassion and understanding. She had read about hostage negotiators who used similar techniques, but she had never seen it in action, especially not from someone who appeared to have nothing and was risking his own safety to help a complete stranger. "Look at her," the homeless man said, gesturing toward Sarah. "She's somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's sister. She's scared, and she's just trying to get home safely. Whatever you're going through, whatever brought you to this point, it doesn't have to define who you are. You can still choose to be better than this moment. The attacker's hand began to loosen on Sarah's arm, and she could see tears forming in his eyes. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. I lost my job 3 months ago. My wife left me, took the kids. I'm about to lose my apartment. I don't know what else to do. I understand more than you think, the homeless man replied softly. But taking from others won't fill the emptiness inside you. It won't bring back what you've lost, and it won't make you feel like a man again. It'll just make you feel worse about yourself than you already do. Sarah held her breath as she watched this extraordinary exchange unfold. The homeless man was literally talking her attacker down, using nothing but empathy and wisdom born from his own suffering. She could see the internal struggle playing out on the attacker's face as he wrestled with his desperation and his conscience. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the attacker released Sarah's arm and stepped back. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. The homeless man nodded understandingly. We all make mistakes when we're desperate. The important thing is that you chose to stop. That takes courage. The attacker looked at Sarah with genuine remorse in his eyes. I'm sorry, he said again, then turned and walked quickly toward the garage exit. Disappearing into the night. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline and shock of what had just happened. Then she turned to face the homeless man who had saved her, wanting to thank him, to understand how he had managed to defuse such a dangerous situation with nothing but words. But when she looked around the garage, he was gone. Wait, Sarah called out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. Please, wait. I want to thank you. She ran toward where she had last seen him, checking behind pillars and between parked cars. But the homeless man had vanished as suddenly and mysteriously as he had appeared. It was as if he had been a guardian angel who had materialized just when she needed him most, then disappeared back into the shadows from which he had come. Sarah stood alone in the parking garage, her hands shaking as the full impact of what had just happened began to sink in. She had come within moments of being robbed, possibly assaulted, or worse, and she had been saved by a homeless man who had risked his own safety to protect her. The courage and compassion he had shown were unlike anything she had ever witnessed. And now he was gone before she could even learn his name. She made her way to her car on unsteady legs, her mind replaying every detail of the encounter. The way the homeless man had spoken to her attacker with such understanding and empathy, the calm authority in his voice, the genuine concern in his eyes. It all suggested someone with training, perhaps in counseling or social work. But what was someone with those skills doing living on the streets? Sarah drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the familiar route through Portland's quiet neighborhoods. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of modern comfort and technological convenience, felt strange and foreign after what she had experienced. She poured herself a glass of wine with trembling hands and sat on her couch, staring out at the city lights while trying to process the evening's events. Sleep was impossible. Every time Sarah closed her eyes, she saw the homeless man's face, heard his gentle voice talking down her attacker with such skill and compassion. She found herself wondering about his story. How had he ended up on the streets? What had happened in his life to bring him to that point? And why had he disappeared so quickly after helping her? The next morning, Sarah couldn't concentrate on work. Her colleagues noticed her distraction during meetings, and she found herself staring out the window, thinking about the man who had saved her life and then vanished without a trace. During her lunch break, she made a decision that would change everything. Sarah drove back to the parking garage where the incident had occurred, hoping against hope that she might find the homeless man somewhere in the area. She spent an hour walking through the surrounding streets, looking in doorways and alleys, asking other homeless individuals if they had seen someone matching his description, but no one seemed to know who she was talking about. Frustrated but not deterred, Sarah decided to expand her search. She visited the downtown mission, the soup kitchen, and the homeless shelter, describing the man to anyone who would listen. Most people were helpful but couldn't provide any useful information. It was as if the man had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. You know, said Margaret, an elderly volunteer at the homeless shelter, we get a lot of people through here, and sometimes the ones who help others the most are the ones who stay in the shadows. They don't want recognition or thanks, they just do what's right because it's right. That evening, Sarah found herself walking through Pioneer Courthouse Square, one of Portland's most popular gathering places for homeless individuals. She had never really paid attention to the homeless population before, always hurrying past with her eyes focused on her phone or her destination, but now she looked at each face, wondering about their stories, their struggles, their humanity. It was there, sitting on a bench near the fountain, that Sarah met Eleanor, a woman in her 60s who had been living on the streets for 2 years after losing her home to medical bankruptcy. Eleanor listened patiently as Sarah described the man she was looking for. Sounds like you met one of the guardian angels, Eleanor said with a knowing smile. There are a few folks out here who seem to show up whenever someone's in real trouble. They don't stick around for thanks or recognition, they just help and then disappear. Guardian angels, Sarah asked, intrigued. That's what we call them. People who've been through hell themselves but somehow still have enough compassion left to help others. They understand suffering in a way that most people can't, and they use that understanding to make a difference, even when they have nothing to give but their presence and their words. Eleanor's description resonated deeply with Sarah. It explained the homeless man's ability to connect with her attacker, his understanding of desperation and loss, his skill at diffusing a dangerous situation through empathy rather than force. Do you think I'll ever find him? Sarah asked. Eleanor studied her face carefully. Maybe the question isn't whether you'll find him, but what you're going to do with the gift he gave you. Eleanor's words haunted Sarah for days. What was she going to do with the gift the homeless man had given her? She had always considered herself a good person. She donated to charities, volunteered occasionally at local nonprofits, and treated people with basic respect and kindness. But she realized now that she had been living in a bubble, insulated from the real struggles that people faced, just blocks from her comfortable apartment and successful business. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she understood that the homeless man's gift wasn't just saving her from physical harm. It was opening her eyes to a world of suffering and resilience that existed parallel to her own privileged life. She began to see homeless individuals differently, not as problems to be avoided or statistics to be pitied, but as human beings with complex stories and inherent dignity. Sarah started volunteering at the downtown mission 3 evenings a week, serving meals and listening to stories. She learned about veterans struggling with PTSD, families who had lost everything to medical bills, young people who had aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Each story deepened her understanding of how quickly life could change, how thin the line was between stability and homelessness. It was during one of these volunteer shifts that Sarah met David, a former social worker who had been living on the streets for 6 months after losing his job and apartment due to a mental health crisis. David's story struck Sarah as particularly tragic. Here was someone who had dedicated his life to helping others, only to find himself in need of the very services he had once provided. The hardest part, David told Sarah, as they cleaned up after the evening meal service, isn't the cold or the hunger or even the danger, it's the invisibility. People look right through you, like you're not even human anymore. Sarah thought about her own behavior before that night in the parking garage, how she had hurried past homeless individuals without making eye contact, without acknowledging their existence. The shame of that realization motivated her to do more. She started carrying care packages in her car, bottles of water, granola bars, warm socks, and small gift cards to local restaurants. But more importantly, she began stopping to talk to people, to learn their names, to treat them with the dignity and respect that every human being deserved. 1 month after the incident in the parking garage, Sarah was walking through downtown when she saw a commotion near the bus station. A crowd had gathered around something, and she could hear someone shouting for help. Sarah pushed through the crowd and saw an elderly homeless woman collapsed on the sidewalk, clearly in medical distress. While bystanders stood around, unsure of what to do, Sarah immediately called 911 and knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse and trying to keep her conscious until paramedics arrived. As she held the woman's hand and spoke reassuring words, Sarah felt a strange sense of déjà vu. "You're going to be okay," she told the woman softly. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." It was then that Sarah noticed another homeless man kneeling on the other side of the woman, helping to keep her stable and calm. He was younger than the man who had saved her, but there was something familiar about his gentle demeanor and the way he spoke to the distressed woman with such compassion. After the paramedics arrived and took the woman to the hospital, Sarah approached the man who had helped. "Thank you for stopping to help," she said. "Not everyone would have done that." The man smiled sadly. "Someone once told me that we're all connected, that helping others is really just helping ourselves. I try to remember that, especially when I'm having a hard day." "Who told you that?" Sarah asked, though she somehow already knew the answer. "A guy I met a few weeks ago. Older fellow, really wise. He helped me through a rough patch, talked me out of doing something stupid, then he just disappeared, like he was never there at all." Sarah's heart began to race. What did he look like? The man described someone who matched exactly the homeless man who had saved Sarah, down to the kind eyes and the calm, authoritative voice. But when Sarah asked where she might find this mysterious helper, the man just shrugged. "He's like a ghost. That one shows up when people need him most, then vanishes. Some of the folks on the street call him the Guardian. Nobody knows his real name or where he stays." That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about this mysterious figure who seemed to appear whenever someone was in desperate need. She had heard similar stories from other people she had met through her volunteer work, accounts of a homeless man who talked people out of suicide, who protected women from attackers, who helped addicts get clean, who always seemed to know exactly what to say to diffuse dangerous situations. Sarah began to realize that her encounter in the parking garage wasn't unique. This man, the Guardian, as people called him, was apparently making a habit of helping others and then disappearing before anyone could thank him or learn more about him. Sarah's search for the Guardian became an obsession that consumed her thoughts and shaped her actions. She started documenting every story she heard about him, creating a map of his appearances throughout the city. The pattern that emerged was remarkable. He seemed to appear wherever the most vulnerable people needed help the most. Always at exactly the right moment. Always with exactly the right words. There was Maria, a teenage runaway who had been about to get into a car with a man who clearly had bad intentions, until the guardian appeared and convinced her to go to a youth shelter instead. There was Robert, a veteran with PTSD who had been standing on a bridge contemplating suicide, until the guardian spent 3 hours talking him down and connecting him with mental health services. There was Jennifer, a single mother who had been evicted from her apartment and was sleeping in her car with her 2 young children, until the guardian somehow arranged for her to get temporary housing and a job interview. Each story was different, but they all shared common elements. The guardian's uncanny ability to appear at moments of crisis, his skill at de-escalating dangerous situations, his deep understanding of human suffering, and his mysterious habit of disappearing before anyone could properly thank him or learn more about his identity. Sarah's investigation led her deeper into Portland's homeless community, and she began to understand the complex ecosystem of survival that existed on the streets. She learned about the unwritten rules, the informal networks of support, the way information traveled through the community faster than any official communication system. It was through these networks that Sarah finally got her first real lead. A woman named Patricia, who had been homeless for 5 years and seemed to know everyone on the streets, pulled Sarah aside after a meal service at the mission. "I hear you've been asking about the guardian," Patricia said quietly. "There's something you should know about him, something most people don't understand." Sarah leaned in, eager to hear anything that might help her find the man who had saved her life. "He wasn't always homeless," Patricia continued. "Word is, he used to be somebody important, a doctor, maybe, or a therapist. Someone who knew how to help people, who had training in dealing with crisis situations." "What happened to him?" Sarah asked. Patricia shrugged. "Same thing that happens to a lot of us. Life knocked him down, and he couldn't get back up. But the difference with him is that even though he lost everything, he never lost his desire to help others. If anything, being on the streets made him better at it, because now he understands what rock bottom really feels like." That evening, Sarah was walking through the Pearl District when she saw a familiar figure sitting alone on a bench outside a closed coffee shop. Her heart stopped as she recognized the profile, the worn clothing, the quiet dignity that had impressed her so much that night in the parking garage. It was him, the guardian, the man who had saved her life and then vanished without a trace. Sarah approached slowly, afraid that if she moved too quickly, he might disappear again like smoke. As she drew closer, she could see that he was reading a worn paperback book by the light of a street lamp, completely absorbed in the story. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly, not wanting to startle him. The man looked up, and Sarah saw recognition flicker in his eyes. For a moment she thought he might run, but instead, he simply closed his book and smiled sadly. "I wondered if I might see you again," he said in the same calm, gentle voice that had talked down her attacker. "How are you doing? Any lasting effects from that night?" Sarah sat down on the bench beside him, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. "I'm fine, thanks to you. But I've been looking for you for weeks. I wanted to thank you properly, to understand why you helped me, and then just disappeared." The guardian, she still didn't know his real name, studied her face carefully. "You don't need to thank me. I did what anyone should have done in that situation." "But that's not true," Sarah protested. "Most people would have walked away, or called the police from a safe distance. You put yourself in danger to help a complete stranger, and you did it with such skill, such compassion. You saved my life, and I don't even know your name." The man was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty street. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a sadness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "My name is Dr. Michael Harrison," he said quietly. "And helping you that night was the first time in 2 years that I felt like myself again." Dr. Michael Harrison's story unfolded slowly as they sat together on that bench in the Pearl District, 2 strangers connected by a moment of crisis that had changed both of their lives. Sarah listened in amazement as Michael told her about his previous life, a successful psychiatrist who had specialized in crisis intervention and trauma counseling, a man who had dedicated his career to helping people through their darkest moments. "I had everything," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A thriving practice, a beautiful home, a wife and daughter who meant the world to me. I thought I understood suffering because I treated it every day, but I had no idea what real loss felt like." The tragedy that had destroyed Michael's life was sudden and senseless. His wife and 8-year-old daughter had been killed by a drunk driver while driving home from his daughter's piano recital. Michael had been working late that night, missing the recital to see patients who he thought needed him more than his family did in that moment. The guilt was unbearable. Michael continued, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I couldn't save them, couldn't protect them, couldn't even be there for their last moments because I was too busy trying to fix other people's problems. I lost my mind, lost my practice, lost everything that mattered to me." Michael had spent his savings on alcohol and prescription drugs, trying to numb the pain that threatened to consume him. When the money ran out, he lost his house, his car, his professional license. Within 18 months of the accident, Dr. Michael Harrison had become just another homeless man on the streets of Portland, invisible to the world that had once respected and needed him. But something strange happened, Michael said, looking directly at Sarah for the first time since he had started his story. The skills I had learned as a psychiatrist, the ability to read people, to understand their pain, to know what to say in a crisis, those didn't disappear just because I lost everything else. If anything, they became more powerful because now I understood suffering from the inside. Sarah began to understand why Michael had been so effective that night in the parking garage, why he seemed to appear whenever people needed help most. His own trauma had given him a unique ability to connect with others who were experiencing their worst moments. That night when I helped you, Michael continued, it was the first time since the accident that I felt like I had a purpose again. For 2 years, I had been drowning in my own grief, but suddenly I was able to use my pain to help someone else. It reminded me of who I used to be, of who I might still be able to become. Sarah felt tears streaming down her own face as she listened to Michael's story. She thought about all the people he had helped since that night, the suicidal veteran, the teenage runaway, the single mother, and countless others whose stories she had heard during her search for him. You've been helping people all over the city, Sarah said. Everyone calls you the guardian. You've saved so many lives, made such a difference. Michael shook his head. I'm not a guardian angel. I'm just a broken man trying to find meaning in the pieces of his life. Helping others helps me remember that there's still good in the world, even when everything feels dark. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Michael, I want you to know that what you did for me changed my life too. I've been volunteering, trying to help the homeless community, trying to understand the struggles that people face. But I think there's more we could do together. Michael looked at the card. It was for Sarah's tech company, but she had written her personal phone number on the back. I've been thinking about developing an app, Sarah continued. Something that could connect people in crisis with trained counselors and resources. I have the technical skills, but I need someone who understands both the clinical side and the reality of life on the streets. I need someone like you. Michael stared at the card in amazement. Sarah, I don't have a license anymore. I'm homeless. I'm not the man I used to be. Maybe not, Sarah said gently, but you're the man who saved my life and the lives of countless others. You're the man who turned his own tragedy into a way to help people. That's not broken, that's heroic. For the first time since she had found him, Michael smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. I don't know if I'm ready to be Dr. Harrison again, he said quietly, but maybe I could try being Michael, the guy who helps people and doesn't run away before they can say thank you. 6 months later, Sarah and Michael launched their crisis intervention app, which connected people experiencing mental health emergencies with trained counselors who understood trauma from personal experience. Michael had gotten clean, found housing, and was working toward reinstating his medical license. But more importantly, he had found a way to honor his family's memory by helping others survive their darkest moments. Their story reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes or have superpowers. Sometimes they're broken people who choose to use their pain to help others heal. Sometimes the person who saves your life is someone who needed saving themselves. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the chance to matter again. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that everyone has the potential to be someone's guardian angel, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of hope, resilience, and the incredible ways that ordinary people do extraordinary things when they choose compassion over indifference. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe that every life has value, every person deserves dignity, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simply one human being caring enough to help another.